To say that Anime Boston is celebrating 20 years in 2023 is a statement that comes with a couple of asterisks. For one, it has been 20 years since the first Anime Boston, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there have been 20 Anime Bostons. To be more specific, there weren't events in 2020 and 21 for obvious reasons. And two, if you want to get technical about it, the documented planning of Anime Boston dates back to 2001, well over a year before the first Anime Boston actually happened. Anime Boston has a pretty interesting history, as a matter of fact. From day one, the con was a remarkable success. In fact, its first event was the most attended first-year fan-run anime convention at the time. And that's already a pretty big accomplishment, sure, but it gets even bigger when you realize that it would have been an even bigger event if the fire marshal hadn't showed up. And 20 years after that first event, Anime Boston is still New England's largest anime con. And while this isn't to say that the con hasn't made its mistakes along the way, because it definitely has, and you can bet we'll talk all about LineCon and Providence Anime Conference later in the video, just be patient. But for the most part, all Anime Boston has done is get bigger and better in the years since. I've been going to Anime Boston since 2012. I love this con. I've been doing panels at this con for years. I was pressed this past year. I'm not even kidding when I say that Anime Boston is my favorite con. And this is why I'd like to walk you through a little bit of its history. To be more specific, I want to focus on Anime Boston's younger and more formative years, which encompasses most of the 2000s. In particular, most everything that we're going to be talking about is going to be from 2001 to 9. So think the planning of Anime Boston and its first handful of events. That said, I do want to focus first and foremost on its earliest history because, honestly, I just think it's got a pretty interesting backstory that's worth knowing about. Or, at the very least, I think so, and I've interviewed a number of longtime Anime Boston goers, volunteers, and even one of its founders and its current con chair about it. You can see the full list of people that I've interviewed in the description if you're interested. So with all that being said, let me tell you all about it. Even though the first Anime Boston happened in 2003, the planning for Anime Boston predates that by well over a year. So let's go ahead and rewind back to 2001. It's the turn of the millennium, Toonami is alive, well, and arguably the single largest anime tastemaker in the US, and while cons in the West are still a relatively new thing, at this point there are a handful of them that have been around for a few years and have established themselves as the bigger cons. But that said, they're far from alone, and in fact, the rapid rise of anime's popularity in the West in the past few years is creating more demand/interest in seeing new cons than ever. Relevant to this video, of course, New England, which, for those of you unfamiliar, is basically the northeasternmost corner of the continental US, wasn't totally without cons, but it was certainly without any bigger anime-centric ones. There were a handful of smaller anime cons here and there, some of which we will talk about later in this video, and a number of comic and/or sci-fi cons such as Arruda, but as far as larger anime cons in the area went, there wasn't really much of anything. At this point, the closest of the larger anime cons to New England was definitely Otakon, but even so, it was still a decent distance away, being all the way over in Baltimore. And medium-sized cons were around at the time too, of course, cons such as KatsuCon in Anime North, for example, but they still weren't in New England. So basically, for New Englanders wanting to attend a larger anime con or even medium-sized anime cons, they had options that were close relative to, say, A-Con or Anime Expo, sure, but they still weren't exactly local. Like, as in, already in New England local. And for the growing number of New England anime fans, the need for something more local was becoming more and more apparent by the day. Derek Guter, one of the original members of the New England Anime Society and who would be in programming operations and the video programming director for Anime Boston 2003, emphasized this in the first of a series of columns he wrote in 2002 about Anime Boston's creation. Quote, On the ride home from Otakon last year, my friend and provider of a ride, Eric, and I got to talking. We had to do something to pass the time, after all. He had been in charge of the anime club at Boston University for a while, in which I had been a member and seen a lot of the behind-the-scenes working and maneuvering that went on. We both sorely missed having a chance to hang out with a bunch of other anime fans for a while and watch cool stuff. Having just had a blast at Otakon, we bemoaned the lack of a comparable anime convention in New England, largely because we still have hours and hours of driving ahead of us. Maryland is much too far away, especially on the way home. Enter MikaCon 2001, a small one-year con in Merrimack, New Hampshire, which tends to be pointed to by Anime Boston's old guard as being the inspiration for Anime Boston. Now, to be clear, it is not the first anime con to have happened in New England. No, that's believed to be New England MiniCon 1999 in Farmington, Maine, which, per New England MiniCon founder and con chair Julie York, had an attendance probably in the hundreds and was founded because, quote, I wanted to have something like it nearby and had started an anime club at UMF, which still exists, yay! So I started both. Now, New England MiniCon was still around in 2001, but per AnimeCons.com's convention schedules, there would only be 2 more anime conventions to happen in New England in 2001. And with a total of 4 cons happening in the region that year, 2001 had the most cons New England had yet had in a single year, as 1999 and 2000 only had New England MiniCon. But getting back to MikaCon, it was the second of those 4 New England cons in 2001, happening just a few months after New England MiniCon. And it's generally regarded as being the con where the idea for Anime Boston was planted. To be more specific, enter Patrick Delahanty, a Massachusetts-based con-goer, anime on DVD user, and Chibi Project host and founder.
I'm Patrick D. Welcome to the Chibi Project. We're here in Newton, Massachusetts, where it all began back in 1998. The Chibi Project is an experiment to see what would happen to toys under certain amounts of destruction. It all started back in 1998 when I was given a gift. A friend of mine, Liz from Virginia, was given some Sailor Moon figurines, and she had a Chibi Moon figure as part of that she didn't want anymore. So she gave it to me and said, here, you can do whatever you want with this. And so then she took it, dropped it on the floor, stomped on it, nothing happened. So I decided to take it upon myself to see how I could destroy it in various creative ways. The first experiment was done here at the Newtonville commuter rail station in Newton, Massachusetts. I took Chibi Moon, I placed her on the rails right before a commuter rail train came. The train came along at about 55 miles an hour and came into the station and ran her over. But with all the dust and debris and leaves, I had a hard time seeing if she actually got run over. And so after the train had departed the station, I looked down the rails and there was just a pink smudge. I walked about 40 feet down the tracks here and I found her. She had just been scratched up a little bit. She hadn't even been smushed. I thought she'd be smushed like a penny, but nothing. She was pretty much intact. So that's really what started it all. And that's what started the Chibi Project.
Anyways, Patrick, who's believed to be MikaCon's first pre-registrant, wrote the following in his MikaCon con report. The Northeast had always gone without any anime conventions, while places like Virginia and Texas got more than their fair share. With such a large anime fan base in the area, I couldn't figure out why nobody had organized a convention before. Indeed, Patrick, that is a really good question, albeit one that needs to be workshopped a bit because, like we already discussed, New England MiniCon predates MikaCon by a few years. But also, MikaCon wasn't affiliated with any school, its campus, and/or their anime club, and it wasn't fairly deep into Maine. So basically what I'm getting at here is that it's not too terribly hard to see how a con like New England MiniCon might have flown under the radars of other New England anime fans, such as Patrick at the time of writing this. With that context in mind, let's go ahead and revisit Patrick's question. It it was pretty evident to everyone that there were plenty of anime fans in New England. So then, why were anime cons so few and far between? And why were they so small if the anime fan base in the area was so large? And for that matter, being such a big city, you'd really think that Boston would be an obvious place to host such a con, right? Well, yes and no. Remember, there were not nearly as many cons happening in the early 2000s as there are, say, now. Plus, Boston's an expensive city, so just having an anime convention in Boston was easier said than done. Nonetheless, Patrick and a friend from Anime on DVD's forums, Adam Ferreira, wanted to make one happen, and thus began the planning of the con that would be Anime Boston. Oh, and I say the con that would be Anime Boston because during the con's genesis, there was another name being considered for it. Per Patrick, another possible name that was being strongly considered was Anime Revolution as a reference to Boston's prominence in the American Revolution. But in November of 2001, it was put to a vote on the Anime on DVD forums, where Anime Boston ended up decisively winning, thus naming the still unannounced con. Yeah, speaking of which, by the way, that Anime on DVD poll was also the first signal to the public that Anime Boston was going to be happening, the next of which would be the official announcement from the newly formed New England Anime Society, a non-profit organization founded with the purpose of staging Boston's first all-anime convention, but I'm starting to get a little bit ahead of myself. Anyways, so the planning for the con that would be Anime Boston started in October of 2001. That's just a few months after MikaCon, the same month as Great American Anime Expo 2001, which kinda was, but also kinda wasn't in AnimeCon in Boston, the same month as the first Big Apple Anime Fest, which was, somewhat nearby, being in New York, of course, though it still wasn't quite New England, and also during the early stages of the launch of what's become New England's longest-running AnimeCon, PortCon Maine. I couldn't find any concrete information on its planning, but considering that its first event was in June of 2002, I think it's also reasonable to assume that another New England AnimeCon, BakuretsuCon in Vermont, was probably in the early stages of its launch as well, but I digress. But anyways, Adam and Patrick weren't the only founding team members of Anime Boston. To be more specific, fellow Anime on DVD members Derek Guter, Tiffany Nadeau, and Alana Shenton soon joined them, and they comprised the original board of the non-profit organization, the New England Anime Society, which, again, was founded with the purpose of staging Boston's first all-anime convention. Thanks to their efforts, the official announcement that the con was happening went public in January 2002, which was more than a year ahead of the con's scheduled date. The announcement basically said that, well, one, that the con would be happening, that it was scheduled for April 18th through 20th, 2003 at the Park Plaza Hotel in Boston, that the con's chairman was Adam Ferreira, there was a taste of what scheduling would be like and what kind of events would be at the con, details about how con attendees can get a special room rate of $119 plus another $20 per person per night if they want to reserve a room at the hotel, and finally, that badges would be $25 for the whole weekend if you pre-registered. But before I tell you about arguably the most interesting part of this announcement, other than the fact that it existed, just at all, I first feel the need to pause and point something out. As you may recall, earlier I mentioned that Boston is an expensive city, so jump-starting a con in Boston is easier said than done. Despite this, not only was it quite obviously happening, but it was happening at the historic Park Plaza Hotel, which is a very nice hotel, and it's in a very prime area of Boston. Like, just to give you an idea of how ridiculously good a rate of $119 a night was, the Park Plaza used to have a section on their site dedicated to promo deals. And on an archive of that page from December of 2000, the cheapest one is $159 per night for a single or double occupancy, for their Shop Your Way Through the Holidays package. The other packages are all upwards of $200. The same page, but in June of 2001, only has one deal with a price tag on it, and it's $215 for 2 people. Granted, all these deals do come with other stuff too, but all the same, there is a very stark difference between all these numbers and $119. So this all begs the question, how on earth was a first-year con able to pull this off? Well, as you may have noticed, all the initial planning for Anime Boston was happening in the later months of 2001, or to put that a little more plainly, in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. Travel was down, hotels were looking for ways to make up for the lost business, and per Patrick, this allowed Anime Boston to get, quote, some amazing rates. A handful of other Boston hotels were being considered for housing the con, though according to Patrick, it ultimately ended with a bidding war between the Sheraton and the Park Plaza, and, well, the Park Plaza won. And yet, despite how remarkably cheap the room rate was for a con happening in central Boston, perhaps the most interesting part of this announcement was the con's official affiliation with AnimeOnDVD.com. It's not around anymore today, but once upon a time, Anime on DVD was a fairly prominent anime news site and forum that specialized in reporting and reviewing features exclusive to the cool new DVD format. While Chris Beveridge, the guy who ran Anime on DVD, wasn't personally involved in the nitty-gritty planning of Anime Boston, Anime on DVD nonetheless played a key role in making the foundation that Anime Boston was built on. Per ANN editor, longtime Anime Boston goer, and banana narrator Mike Toole,
Yeah. Anime on DVD was a very popular website in those days and had a really active user forum. Like, industry members would go there to pull, what fans wanted on their DVDs and what titles they might want to see released on DVD. So that was definitely a big thing. And the site was run by a guy who lived in Eastern Massachusetts, Chris Beveridge. And in the city, a couple of years prior to Anime Boston starting up, there would be Anime on DVD meetups, where anime fans would go to hang out with Chris and talk about DVDs and just kind of nerd out. And the founders of the people who would go on to found Anime Boston, Patrick, Adam, and Alana, they went to these meetings. So you could absolutely say that Anime on DVD contributed to the founding of Anime Boston. That is, I think, a strong theory.
So not only was Chris a New Englander, but he had also known the people who would go on to found Anime Boston through their involvement on Anime on DVD. So naturally, it's easy to see why he would have let Anime on DVD be associated with this con. And not only was Anime on DVD a particular hub for New England-based anime fans, or perhaps to be more specific, a hub for anime fans in general, but the New England users seem to have a particularly strong sense of community. Anyways, so not only did Anime on DVD contribute in that way, but also its affiliation with Anime Boston gave the con a sense of legitimacy that it might not have otherwise got. Certainly not one that it would have achieved so quickly, at the very least. Prior to Anime Boston, Chris Beveridge had done panels at a number of other cons, but doesn't recall Anime on DVD having an official presence like the one they had at Anime Boston 2003, which he described as Anime on DVD having been a sponsor who helped with facilitating conversations. To be more specific, that's facilitating conversations with the anime industry. And sure enough, per Patrick, Anime on DVD's relationship with the anime industry really helped Anime Boston develop one as well.
Thanks to Anime on DVD's relationship with the industry, that also helped build Anime Boston's relationship with the industry. So they came to what was essentially the Anime on DVD con, and they learned that Anime Boston's great, and they built the relationship with Anime Boston, and over the years, the industries kept coming back. I mean, a lot of the names have changed, but as companies come and go, Anime Boston tends to be one of the destinations where they like to come and make announcements or show premieres.
Would you say that this relationship with Anime on DVD helped build Anime Boston up in these early days?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Through Anime on DVD, we not only got attendance, but we got noticed by the industry, and I think we got taken more seriously than if we were just some random bunch of people.
All right, so it is now 2002. The word is out that Anime Boston is happening, but how did that word spread beyond the Anime on DVD forums? Well, the advertising for the con was pretty solid, especially for a first-year fan-run con that didn't really have the money or resources of a larger and more established con. That being said, what they did have in absolute abundance was time, and plenty of it, seeing as how the con was still more than a year out when that announcement was posted. According to Patrick, they had a table promoting Anime Boston at a number of cons, most notably including Otakon. They had a poster up at a now-closed anime store called Tokyo Kid in Harvard Square. They put ads in anime magazines, they put flyers in local comic shops, they left flyers at other cons, and they spoke and distributed flyers at the anime clubs at a number of nearby colleges, of which, just in case you haven't been to the greater Boston area, there are several. Looking through an archived thread from the Anime Boston forums where people talked about where they heard about the con reveals similar results. That there were people going to the con with their anime club, and that a lot of people heard about the con through stuff like Anime on DVD, Tokyo Kid, word of mouth, and of course, the many, many, many flyers, especially at other cons. That being said, for as plentiful and powerful as the many flyers were, I really don't want to understate just how much work that word of mouth also ended up putting in. Not just in advertising the con, but also, according to Patrick, it also secured the con's most attention-grabbing set of guests. So, TotemCon 2002 was a remarkably tiny con with an estimated attendance of 60 people, maybe 100 at the most in Natick, Massachusetts. But among those scant few attendees was none other than Patrick Delahanty, and honestly, I'm just gonna let you hear what he told me because this is absolutely wild, and y'all really just need to hear this one right from the source.
So yeah, TotemCon, they had flown Scott McNeil and Brian Drummond in from Vancouver. The attendance, there were literally only 3 cosplayers there.
Oh, geez.
I was one of them.
Oh, wow.
And as they didn't have a printed schedule. They didn't really have a schedule. But they said they had a costume contest. So I knew the other 2 cosplayers. They were friends of mine. And so we were just hanging around and we got bored. It's like, all right, so when's this contest? And we asked somebody that was on staff. They said, oh, well, we'll have it right now. Congratulations, you win. And it was there in the hallway. That was their contest. And so the prize was to have lunch with the voice actor guests. And I had met Scott McNeil at a couple of conventions before, and I didn't expect him to remember me. He probably didn't. But so we got to have lunch with them. And, during it, they brought up some sandwiches from the hotel restaurant, and we were essentially left alone in the room with these 2 voice actors. And so, of course, Anime Boston came up, and I think it was Brian Drummond that said, hey, why don't we go to Anime Boston too? And I'm like, well, I'm vice chair and we'll have to discuss it internally, but yeah, I can bring that up. And so I would suggest it to the other staff. And somehow that blossomed into, let's get all of the Gundam Wing, the main cast. And so with Brian Drummond's help, we because we already had Kirby, we got Scott McNeil, Ted Cole, Brad Swale, and we were going to get Brian Drummond because he helped us do this, but he had some schedule conflict and he couldn't do it. But because I got to interact with these actors, this whole idea to have, we'll have all 5 Gundam Wing voice actors and make a big splash, and I think it worked. It was a first and only time all 5 of them have been at a convention. And in fact, Ted Cole, it's the only convention he's ever done.
I tried reaching out to both Brian Drummond and Scott McNeil to see if they could tell me more about this, but alas, I never got a reply. But however weird the circumstances leading up to it may have been, the bottom line was still the same. Anime Boston got, for the first and, unbeknownst to them at the time, only time, the main cast of Gundam Wing as voice actor guests at Anime Boston 2003. And it's really hard to overstate just how surreal the idea of a first-year fan-run convention like Anime Boston getting to be the first ever con to host the main cast of such a well-known anime was. Yeah, I know Gundam Wing is nowhere near as big now as it used to be, but at the turn of the millennium, Gundam Wing was easily one of the most popular anime in the West. To this day, I'd go so far as to argue that strictly within the West, I honestly don't think that any other Gundam series has been as popular as Wing was at its peak. And that's not to say that no other Gundam series has been popular in the West, because plenty of them have. As a matter of fact, as I'm sitting here working on this video, Witch from Mercury is also pretty popular. And this is to say nothing of how Gundam Wing also had the advantage of airing on Toonami at its height, and also being the first Gundam series to air on North American television. But all the same, it was immensely popular in the West in a way that I really don't think that any other Gundam series has been since it aired. Per ANN in 2000, Gundam Wing has become, in little over 1 week, Cartoon Network's highest rated program on the Toonami block by a substantial margin. Gundam Wing's average rating is consistently beating Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon in all age categories. As for teen ratings, Gundam Wing has been able to maintain its #1 position, not just on the Toonami block, but against the entire Cartoon Network. So, yeah, in conclusion, Gundam Wing was extremely popular in the early 2000s. But this wasn't just a big deal because of Gundam Wing's popularity, though that definitely helped. Because while it would still be cool if Anime Boston was the first con to be able to get all the Gundam Wing boys in one place, you may have noticed that Patrick also mentioned that no other con has done this since Anime Boston 2003. And while nowadays the biggest reason why this hasn't happened again since is the tragic death of Kirby Morrow, who voiced Troa in 2020. Prior to that, it was largely because Mark Hildreth and Ted Cole, the voices of Hero and Wu Fei respectively, don't seem to be too big on con going. And in fact, Anime Boston 2003 was the first con that either of them had been a guest at. In the years since, Mark Hildreth has been a guest at a sparse number of anime cons, the most recent of which being, according to AnimeCons.com, Anime World Chicago 2011, and as of when I am making this video, Anime Boston 2003 has remained Ted Cole's one and only AnimeCon guest appearance. That same year, he was supposed to be at Anime North alongside all the other Gundam Wing boys as well, but per a surviving blog post, which included a few photos from the voice actor panel, he was unable to make it to the con. That being said, I couldn't find any further information on the matter, let alone anything specific. But Anime Boston 2003 was able to get all the Gundam Wing boys at the con, and it was a really big deal that they were able to do that. The news that they'd be there wasn't made public till February 2003, only 2 months before the con, but more than ever, this con really felt like it was gonna be something big. But just how big it would end up being, well, nobody possibly could have known. It's at this point that we can finally fast forward to the con itself, which took place the weekend of April 18th through 20th at the Park Plaza Hotel. I really can't blame the con organizers for thinking that the Park Plaza was gonna work out. You know, Sci-Fi Con Arruda had been held there a few times before that first Anime Boston happened, and, you know, it seemed to work just fine for them. And while the Park Plaza isn't massive, it's not exactly tiny either. And Anime Boston 2003 was going to be the con's first year, so I mean, how big could it possibly be? Per an archive of their website from April 2003, the Park Plaza could accommodate from 10 to 2,000 people. According to Patrick, based on MikaCon's attendance, which was reported to be 330 people, Anime Boston was originally anticipating somewhere around 750 people, with a high estimate of 1,000. As the number of pre-registrations increased, so too did their attendance estimate, which floated between 1,000 and 2,000 people. Ultimately, Anime Boston 2003 had a reported attendance of 4,110 people, and there would have been a lot more if the fire marshal hadn't shown up. Yeah, arguably the most widely remembered thing about Anime Boston 2003 was just how packed it was and how on Saturday, the fire marshal showed up. Ultimately, the con was able to negotiate that pre-registrants and people who were already there and registered were totally fine, but that they would stop letting in new attendees who were registering on site. In other words, if you hadn't either pre-registered or registered before the fire marshal showed up, then you were just out of luck and you couldn't make it into the con. And unfortunately, that did end up happening to a number of people.
Yeah, and I wasn't there for that, but from what I've heard through former chair Andrea Finnan, she was chairman starting in 2007, but at the time she was just a staff member like a lot of us, and the fire marshal did show up and threatened to shut the whole thing down because, there's way too many people. And through negotiation, it was agreed that, okay, we'll put up stanchions to keep people organized and in line, and we will stop accepting new registrations, and only people that have already pre-registered can get in. And through that little bit of crowd management and negotiation, we managed to still let people in who had pre-registered and bought their badge in advance, and anybody that was already there was fine. But anybody that had driven, I remember there was one story of a family that had driven up from Pennsylvania but didn't pre-register, and sorry, there's nothing we can do. The fire marshal's not going to let you in, so. Stuff like that. When we heard about that, we felt pretty bad, but there's nothing we could do about it.
So this all begs the question. What happened that caused such a remarkable disconnect between all these numbers? Obviously by the time of the event, the con was expecting more attendance than, say, MikaCon, and they, of all people, knew how badly New England had been hurting for a larger anime con of its own. But what brought so many people to this first-year fan-run con that the event had to start turning people away? Well, when I asked this question to my interviewees, the most common answer was the many college students who are in and around Boston. To be more specific, as I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of colleges in the greater Boston area, and Anime Boston advertised at a number of their anime clubs, and that's just kind of the thing with anime conventions. They have a lot of appeal to teens and young adults. So naturally, they showed up. And they showed up in droves because there's droves of them who can show up. And while Patrick made note of the many college students in the greater Boston area as well, his main answer when I asked him this was the amount of time they had to advertise the event. After all, the event had been publicly known about to some degree since November of 2001, but had been publicly announced in January 2002. So basically, there was an exceptionally long period for people to learn about the con, and a wealth of ways for people, especially people in the Boston area, to learn about it. Other recurring answers were Anime on DVD's official presence at the con, giving it a sense of legitimacy, which we already discussed, and then of course the con's guest list. Obviously, the Gundam Wing Boys were a big deal. In fact, Patrick recalls them playing Larger Than Life by the Backstreet Boys as they walked on stage during opening ceremonies. But lest we forget, even outside of the Gundam Wing Boys, the con still had a pretty good guest list, which included, but wasn't limited to, Tiffany Grant, Jamie McGonigal, and Razafon character designer Hiroki Kano. But, getting back to the con itself, even though several people had to be turned away, for the 4,000-ish people who were able to get in, whether because they pre-registered or because they arrived before the fire marshal did, there were plenty of fun things to do, even if they were packed in there like sardines the entire time. Anime Anime Herald editor-in-chief Samantha Ferreira recalled about the 2003 event in the intro to her Anime Boston 2023 coverage. Impromptu Yu-Gi-Oh! Games broke out in random hallways, and the dealer's room was filled to bursting from open to close. That's to say nothing of the grand lobby, which saw no shortage of excited con-goers chatting it up with one another as confused hotel guests tried to make sense of what was unfolding before them. It was a special event, and everybody who was through the halls knew that they were partaking in an experience that would never be repeated. And if they didn't, well, they certainly figured it out once the fire marshal kept attendance that Saturday. A scan of the cons program by Mike Toole shows that Anime Boston 2003 had an array of interesting panels, a viewing room with plenty of good titles, an AMV contest, a voice acting contest called Anime Idol, and more. And although it's not mentioned in the program, a number of the people who were there that I spoke to recall being able to watch the masquerade from the comfort of the TV in their hotel rooms, which honestly sounds wonderful. Also among the events was a Whose Line Is It Anyway-esque comedy event hosted by Patrick, which at the time was called Whose Line Is It Anime, but today is just called Anime Unscripted. And it's since become something of a fixture at Anime Boston.
It's mostly a ripoff of Whose Line Is It Anyway? And I had run that at MikaCon in 2001, and I ran it under the name Whose Line Is It Anime? And I had never run an anime event before, let alone an improv event, but I figured, I can do this. And so I gave it a try, and it was a lot of fun. And so we were trying to come up with programming for Anime Boston 2003, and I said, well, I can run this event again. And so I did. And since then, I've run that event at other conventions and every Anime Boston, and I've run it roughly 50 times now with probably 100 different performers, mostly voice actors. And I just love being able to get up there and run that event. It's so much fun. It's hilarious. And every year there's people that come up to me after and say, oh yeah, I love that show. It was so funny. And so that keeps me going. And a couple times I've thought, well, maybe I can retire it after so long, but then the fans just keep saying how great it was and how much they loved it. It's like, all right, well, I'll do it a little longer.
So yeah, this is all to say that Anime Boston 2003 was a massive success beyond what anyone expected. To quote Mikhail Kolikov and Bamboo Dong's con report on ANN, without a doubt, Anime Boston was a definite success. Even with the organizational mistakes that come with any first-time convention, it was still a great chance for fans to get together and enjoy each other's company. Fun panels and entertaining events made this an experience that many of the attendees will not forget anytime soon. If this year was an unorganized success, one can only imagine the potential for greatness that will be Anime Boston 2004. In addition to being one of Anime Boston's founders, Patrick also created the anime convention directory site animecons.com in November of 2003. And his making that site didn't exactly come out of nowhere. He'd been making con schedules and reviews on his own website for years before that. And I'm telling you this so you know exactly what I mean when I say that Patrick knows anime conventions. And according to Patrick, at the time, Anime Boston 2003 was the largest first-year con. And I have absolutely no reason to doubt that. Patrick knows his stuff when it comes to anime cons, and honestly, who's competing with Anime Boston for this title? Because it's not A-Con, not Otakon, not SakuraCon/BakaCon, not Big Apple Anime Fest, and not even Anime Expo. So yeah, needless to say, the pressure was immediately on for 2004, which it was already clear right out the gate would face similar attendance issues since the con had already booked the Park Plaza for 2004 before their 2003 event happened. And even in the advent of their 2003 attendance numbers, there was nothing they could really do about it. Now, the good news was that they would have slightly more space in 2004 because they also got a building across the street called the Castle, and it's called that because it kind of looks like a castle, and that the dealer's room would be there and that you could buy a badge just to go to the dealer's room. But the bad news was that all the same, they were still in the Park Plaza, and if 2004 was anything like 2003, then crowding would still be an issue even if the dealer's room was across the street. And sure enough, only 2 months before the event itself, the con had already reached maximum capacity. Oh, and wait! There's more! Per an archive of the con's website, masquerade spots had also reached maximum capacity just days before the announcement that the con itself reached maximum capacity. And later that same month, Artist Alley reservations filled up in only 10 minutes. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and say that last bit just one more time so you can really feel the full effect of that. In less than half the time it takes to watch a single episode of just about any given anime, in less than the recommended amount of time it takes to cook most frozen pizzas in an oven, Artist Alley reservations for Anime Boston 2004 filled up completely. Like, I get that obviously there was a very, very finite amount of space. Per an archive of the site from 2007, there were only 34 spots available. But all the same, this is astounding. Footnote, and you want to know what makes it all the more astounding? That isn't even the shortest amount of time that it's taken to fill up. Per an archive of the con site, it took only 5.5 minutes for the 110 Artist Alley spaces to be sold in 2006. Then in 2007, the 194 spaces were sold in about 5 minutes, and it crashed the con's servers. And while I couldn't find any additional information about this, a sign in an Anime Boston museum that was at the con in 2012 claimed that in 2008, it took only 1 singular minute to sell the 180 spaces. But anyways, while having too many attendees is certainly a better problem to be worrying about than too few attendees, it is still a problem nonetheless. As was already mentioned, the con did not anticipate 2003's attendance to be anywhere near as massive as it was, hence why, even before the 2003 event happened, they'd already booked the Park Plaza again for 2004's event. But after seeing the crowd in 2003, Anime Boston did not hesitate to move to a bigger venue for their 2005 event, the Hynes Convention Center, which wasn't too terribly far away. And even though they wouldn't be renting out the entirety of the convention center that year, it was still much more space than the Park Plaza had. So, in the aftermath of that first Anime Boston, the 2004 event hadn't even happened, and yet 2005 and the con's move to the Hynes still just could not happen soon enough. That being said, this isn't to say that 2004 wasn't a fun or successful year, because by and large it was. To list just a few of the guests, the con had Crispin Freeman, Monica Rial, and Hilary Haig. Furthermore, although Anime on DVD was no longer at the con in an official capacity like it was in 2003, 1, there was still an Anime on DVD panel, and 2, the industry presence at the con nonetheless increased. Most notably, this included Funimation being there and announcing that they had rescued the beloved and highly requested Kodocha from licensing hell. To celebrate, they played the opening theme and gave out 120 Baka hammers to the very excited panel attendees. At least one of the people I interviewed, Samantha Ferreira, was there and still had hers, as a matter of fact. So yeah, 2004 was a good year, but 2005 was definitely going to be the turning point for Anime Boston. And the con and the attendees alike were hyper aware of this long before the event itself actually happened. Like, you know what? Check this out. The flyers promoting the 2005 event featured the con's mascots, Achan and Bikun, packed into a sardine can. Furthermore, wrote Mikhail Kolikov about the 2004 event for ANN, the one issue facing Anime Boston that has consistently been identified as a problem by attendees, the question of space and the overall unsuitability of the hotel to hosting an anime convention, is now moot. Anime Boston 2005 is moving to the Hynes Convention Center and an adjacent hotel, both located just a few blocks away, but offering a space that is truly suited for the kind of major event that Anime Boston is. In any case, one thing is clear. Anime Boston is here, Anime Anime Boston is here to stay, and Anime Boston will be around and keeping fans happy for quite a while. So yeah, in case it wasn't already painfully obvious, this is all to say that Anime Boston was definitely excited to finally have the breathing room that the con so desperately needed. So how did the move go then? What was it like? Well, here's what Jenna Leary, Anime Boston's current con chair who was an attendee in 2003 and 4 and has been a volunteer since 2005, recalled about the move.
I remember it was a very different feel. Like, it became much easier to get around places. But at the same time, it was a big space and it was really confusing. And I remember having to almost constantly consult a map just to be like, where the heck am I supposed to go? Where am I supposed to report to? And I just, like, it was overwhelming, but it was obviously a necessary decision.
And was it necessary because of the crowding, would you say? Or
Sure. I mean, where Anime Boston was in the Park Plaza, there was no room to grow. And being capped at such a small number, we could never be where we were today if we hadn't made the move.
So, how did everyone else feel about the move then? And for that matter, how was Anime Boston 2005 just overall? Well, starting with the first question, said Chris Beveridge in his Anime Boston 2005 con report, the move to the Hynes Convention Center, which is connected to the hotel via the Prudential Center, is probably the best thing that could happen. This place will definitely serve the needs of the convention for several years to come, and with plenty of growth. But looking at an archived thread on the Anime Boston forums shows a bit of a mixed response from other attendees, with some people expressing that they love the new venue, loving that there's actual space in Anime Boston now, and appreciating how convenient it is that there's a lot of food options that are nearby. But there's also a number of people in the thread expressing that they missed the Park Plaza, that being in a larger venue made things at Anime Boston feel more spaced out, and it made the con feel more empty. Nonetheless, that the con needed the space that the Hynes provided, and that the Hynes had a lot of things that were just more convenient, especially the food availability, wasn't exactly being debated. The impression one gets is that while some people had their reasons for liking and maybe even preferring the Park Plaza, they nonetheless recognized the necessity of Anime Boston's decision to move. As for things going on at the con itself, there was a Yoko Ishida concert. The guest list was the biggest it had yet been and included, but certainly wasn't limited to, Greg Ayres, Scott McNeil, Monica Rial, Johnny Young Bosch, and Chrono Crusade creator Daisuke Moriyama. A look through the program guide also shows what kind of panels were around, and, there's a number of panels and events that were around in 2003, like Anime Unscripted, the Anime on DVD panel, and Mike Toole's Dubs That Time Forgot, but there's also plenty of new ones. Obviously, the one that sticks out the most to me is this Q&A with a few Gaia Online admins, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, there's lots of industry panels, plenty of events like the Masquerade AMV contest, a pretty wide variety of anime being shown in the video rooms, cosplay chess, the list goes on. So yeah, 2005 was very much a good year for Anime Boston, and really set the stage for the con's growth. To once again quote Chris Beveridge's con report, the convention itself has moved into its new home, and it's one that I hope they can use for years to come since it serves them so well, at least from this participant's perspective. If they had remained at the Park Plaza, I would have dreaded the convention this year, but now I'm very much looking forward to the next year's already, and am counting down the days again until everyone comes back to my hometown and gets a taste of what makes Boston such a great place. My hat is once again off to the great staff of this convention for all they've done for this year's convention. And I'll tell you who else had a great time is the guests. After the con wrapped up, Anime Boston would add a little what our guests said section to their site, and among others, you got Chris Patton saying, Boston rules, the con rules, the fans rule, Monica Rial saying, it was a blast, and Greg Ayres saying, my best con experience ever. And the thing is, I don't think he was kidding. Greg Ayres loved Anime Boston so much that to this day, he has not stopped going. Nearly 20 years later, Greg Ayres has been a guest at Anime Boston every single year that the con has been in operation since his first Anime Boston in 2005. And in fact, he's been pretty involved in the con too. Back when it was still around, he was a DJ for the Informal Dance, colloquially known as the Rave, and dance coordinator for the con between 2011 and 13. And by the way, just in case you were wondering, Greg Ayres lives in Texas, so it's not like he only keeps going because he's local. No, he is far from it. So yeah, this is all to say that, at this point, he's basically just as much of an Anime Boston mascot as A-chan and B-kun. Like, I really don't know if there's any other guests who've been to a specific anime con that wasn't local for them for that many consecutive years, let alone ones who've done that and got more directly involved with the con at any point. It's honestly pretty incredible. But anyways, I actually had the opportunity to speak to Greg at this past Anime Boston about his time at the con, and here's what he had to say about why he keeps coming back to Anime Boston.
My first time in Boston, I'd never been to Boston before. Well, I actually had been once, just like a drive-through trip. But I'd never seen the city. I didn't really know a lot of people here. I knew some of the people on staff from other conventions. But what bowled me over, and what still holds true even to this day, which is kind of hard in this current atmosphere of conventions, is it's a huge, like a behemoth of a conventions. Monster. I don't know whether behemoth is the right word. Giant. I call it a gentle giant. This massive convention that still feels like a small event. Like, people are still friendly with each other. I don't see the drama. I mean, there is drama. There's drama everywhere. But I don't see the same bickering. I don't see fans at each other. I see a really cool community of anime fans. And that was the first thing. One of the big things to me, I've always been very fan-centered, and the larger the convention, usually the worse the fans are treated. And so, like, at most shows, when I'm trying to be, hustled from one place to another, I usually have, in some cases, just, an assistant, or I have an assistant and a security person. And a lot of the big shows, they're like, get out of the way, we've got to go, get out, just pushing people aside. My very first Anime Boston, every single time someone approached me, my handler said, I'm so sorry, we've got to go, he's going to be late for blah, blah, blah. And just that little bitty thing, I'm so sorry, we can't stop. I noticed immediately, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can get everywhere on time provided this is how it's handled, because I don't mind keeping pace as long as everybody's being treated nicely. The minute someone is like, I'm sorry, he doesn't have time, I'm gonna pull a marker out of my pocket and go, hey, did you need an autograph? Just because I can't stand that brush off. So Anime Boston from the jump was different. Anime Boston was a con that cared as much about its attendees as it did a good, industry experience. And then the cool thing about having a big con that feels small is that you have the benefits of a big con. I love small cons, they're my favorite. But you don't have Puffy Amiyumi at a small con. You don't get to meet Miyavi at a small con. And so this is one of those really, really, really rare, like Brigadoon situations where you have a big con that is still fun to attend, and that you get all of the perks of both big and small cons. You can make friends here, you can see rock bands, you can, go to a vendor's hall that looks like a mall, which is our next stop, by the way. Jill and I are heading right to the vendor's hall after this. But it's different. And those conventions that have a heart are the ones that I will always make time for.
Getting back to the con itself, moving to the Hynes instantly let the con grow in a way that it was just completely and utterly unable to back at the Park Plaza. Testament to that is 2005's reported attendance of 7,500 people, more than double 2004's attendance, which, again, was about as high as it possibly could be without the fire marshal once again needing to get involved. And like I mentioned earlier, this also really set the stage for Anime Boston's continued growth, as to this day, the con is still at the Hynes. But of course, this isn't to say that it's been all roses and chocolates, or I guess roses and Pocky, for Anime Boston since moving to the Hynes. In particular, despite also getting The Pillows as a musical guest that year, 2008 proved to be arguably the most tumultuous year yet for the con. Yeah, a bunch of you watching this know exactly what I'm about to talk about, and you probably all just let out a big collective sigh. So, frequently referred to as LineCon, this year the con was trying to implement a new registration system which involved self-service kiosks. But of course, when the weekend of the con happened, it just completely buckled under the pressure. It was slow, it frequently crashed, there weren't enough kiosks, and it was just an absolute disaster. The result was that Friday registration lines for Anime Boston 2008 became legendary for being so excruciatingly long and nightmarish, with several people across the internet complaining about having waited several hours, if not more or less the entire con day, just to get their badge. The surviving photos and video footage of the lines, not to mention the sheer volume of them, really speak for themselves. The Saturday of the con, the then director of public relations made a statement in the forums apologizing for what was going on, explaining what was happening, that they've added a few more registration terminals, that they were going to be staffed and not self-service, reconfigured the queue, and that they've streamlined and reprogrammed the registration system to increase its internal efficiency. But alas, these efforts, while helpful, still weren't exactly a cure-all. Per an ANN piece on the matter, many attendees of this past weekend's Anime Boston convention are complaining about the apparent failure of its registration system, which led to some of them having to endure lines of up to 10 hours on Friday before either picking up or paying for their badges. Many others report waits of 6 or more hours, both on the Friday of the convention and on the Saturday. The good news is that by the time Anime Boston 2009 happened, the issues were completely fixed, and to this day, there's never been a repeat of LineCon within Anime Boston. But the bad news is that this wasn't the only difficulty that 2008 proved to have, not just because, it's 2008, year of the recession, but also because 2008 was the same year that the New England Anime Society tried to launch another con, none other than Providence Anime Conference. And in stark contrast to the first Anime Boston's attracting so many people that the fire marshal showed up, Providence Anime Conference struggled so hard to get people there that reportedly, volunteers were able to get their own hotel rooms since they just had so many extra rooms. Now, I want this video to be more focused on Anime Boston, but God, y'all know me. I just love a good tangent, and this one is just way too weird to pass up talking about, so even if just for a moment, let's talk about Providence Anime Conference a bit. Not to be confused with Rhode Island Anime Con, Providence Anime Conference was the convention of all time. When I was interviewing people and I asked for examples of challenges that Anime Boston has overcome throughout the years or other interesting fun facts about the con, Providence Anime Conference came up a lot. So, what was it? What happened? Well, Providence Anime Conference, or PAC, not to be confused with PAX or PAX East, was a 21+ anime con that only happened once in Providence, Rhode Island in October of 2008. And despite being remarkably well liked by the attendees, the attendance was extremely not great. The con's chairman, Christian Daly, said that the con was a fairly substantial budget deficit. So why is that? Why was such a well-liked con so weakly attended? To answer that, we gotta turn the clock back to 2007 and talk about the con's history. In case you don't already know this, the 2000s were a very loud and chaotic time for anime cons in the West. For more on this, I encourage you to watch my video on yaoi paddles, which I'll have on the end card of the video, but for now, suffice to say, such was the culture of con going at the time that for some con goers, cosplayers especially, cons could often be a dangerous and lawless place where you really take your safety into your own hands, especially when you want to cosplay a smexy bishi. And for the most part, it was younger con-goers, many of whom, granted, were probably well-intentioned but just didn't really grasp what they were doing or that they were being obnoxious, who were making a lot of cons this way. So yeah, knowing this, if you didn't experience it firsthand, that is, it's easy to see why the idea of an adults-only con would have appealed to the steadily growing number of older con-goers. Enter Patrick, who pitched the idea to the New England Anime Society in March of 2007. The pitch was accepted, and the con was first announced to the public at Anime Boston 2007's closing ceremonies. So, cool. All right, it's happening. So, what could go wrong?
We had plans. We had, please note the use of a past tense. We had plans of kind of an advertising campaign, public transit notifications, like ads on buses and trains and things like that, magazine ads, internet ad buys, the kinds of things that you would, I think, normally expect to see for a show of a similar nature in 2008. The way that things ended up coming together, there were actually very few of those things that happened. There was one magazine ad buy that ended up going through. There were kind of a number of personal things that came up for the people that were involved, so try as we wanted to see happen, not everything actually got done. So ultimately, there was one magazine ad in Anime Insider magazine. That was that, and obviously there was word of mouth. There was certainly a segment of I guess what one would refer to as influencers at the time that seemed to, at the very least, discuss it, if not be on board with the idea. So that kind of, it ended up being a bit more grassroots than was initially intended. But that was sort of how things ended up happening.
Yeah, while it wasn't the only issue that they were dealing with, per a 2018 video about the con by Patrick, there were also internal issues and burnout that resulted from asking certain Anime Boston volunteers to juggle another con. Marketing, nonetheless, is consistently pointed at when talking about PAC's largest ongoing issue, the only main advertising for it having been a half-page ad in the August 2008 issue of Anime Insider, though it also got a noteworthy mention in the February issue in a section about new upcoming cons as well. Furthermore, Anime Insider notwithstanding, there was no marketing for this con in Rhode Island. Rhode Island, the state that the event was gonna be happening in. Though for what it's worth, the con did have a banner at the New England Anime Society booths at the cons that they had table space at, including, but obviously not limited to, Anime Boston 2008. Furthermore, Patrick hosted a panel on the Sunday of Anime Boston 2008 that was meant to answer questions about the con, but hardly anybody showed up. At the time, he was a bit worried, but chalked this up to it being Easter afternoon. But of course, in reality, he didn't know it yet, but this would be pretty representative of what general awareness of the con was like, or rather, the lack of general awareness. This is all to say nothing of another issue that stemmed somewhat from all this. Communicating what the con was. Like, yeah, okay, it was a 21 plus con, but why was it a 21 plus con? Like, was it just gonna be a glorified hentai viewing party featuring alcohol? Well, there would be some hentai and some alcohol, sure, but per everyone that I spoke to about it, PAC was primarily meant to be more of an educational con experience. Which, isn't to say that it was meant to be super stuffy and serious, even if that's the impression that the name might give off, just that they wanted programming that they felt would appeal more to an older and more mature audience. But interestingly, as though to prove that it wasn't all serious, without a doubt, the programming that got brought up the most often by people that I interviewed about this was translator Neil Nadelman's screening of Titanic Titanic the animated movie. As in, yes, that Titanic the animated movie, the one with the rapping dog.
My friend Neil Nadelman, who's been a translator in the anime industry for many years, has done bad anime events. Basically he runs a thing called Totally Lame Anime. And if you go to YouTube and you search for all the different people reacting to and dissecting and talking about all of the terrible Italian animated Titanic cartoon movies, Neil is responsible for that phenomenon in that he basically found the VCD copy of the first movie at a Chinatown gift store in like 2001. That led to the entire internet discovering it. Because he made a copy of that. We sent it along to Jerry Beck, who runs cartoon research. Jerry passed it on to a bunch of people. Then a couple of years later, YouTube started up, and folks started discovering it there. But he did a screening of the first Titanic animated film at Providence Anime Conference. And I remember him telling me that, as I started the movie, I suddenly realized, oh my God, I should have made this a drinking game with specific rules, and it could have been a lot of fun. And then he watched the audience at this event make up their own drinking game on the spot. Basically, there's a rotation, like there's a CG rotation of the boat that happens way too often, like every 2 or 3 minutes during part of the movie, and that became just like, okay, anytime that happens, drink.
It's been said by multiple people that at some point or another, the halls of the con were empty because virtually everyone who was there was at a panel, which is honestly pretty astounding for a con of any size, regardless of its attendance level. Speaking of which, by the way, I don't think we've talked specifics yet in terms of just how many people showed up for this con, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Despite being announced as early as Anime Boston 2007, online pre-registration for PAC didn't open up until April of 2008, a few weeks after Anime Boston 2008 wrapped up. So, kinda late for a con that had been at least somewhat publicly known about for a while, especially when there was a whole panel about it at Anime Boston. But per Patrick's video, this was because PAC was using the same registration system as Anime Boston just had.
Let me back up a bit. Anime Boston 2008, to a lot of people that were there, will remember this as, quote, LineCon. There were, let's say, some issues with registration, and it caused very long at-con registration lines. Because it was Anime Boston's registration system used the same system as Providence, and because Anime Boston's pre-registration went up late, because it took time to redo from scratch for some reason, it also delayed Providence pre-registration from going online. And so Providence, because everything was focused on Anime Boston, Providence pre-registration didn't go online until after Anime Boston. So following Anime Boston 2008, the pre-registration for Providence finally launches, and we waited for that flood of pre-registrations. Well, we waited more. Yeah, they didn't come.
But anyways, let's go ahead and talk numbers. The event was going to be capped at 2,000 people. Per Christian, originally, like well before the online pre-reg opened up, the PAC team was anticipating somewhere around 1,000 people, with 1,500 being an optimistic number and 500 being a pessimistic one. And at the start, it was really easy to feel optimistic given how popular Anime Boston was. The New England Anime Society was really successful in starting up one con, so who's to say they can't do it again? Well, ultimately, there were about 300 people at Providence Anime Conference. More specifically, the number listed on animecons.com is 375, but with only 211 of them being paid attendees. So, not quite what they were hoping for. Furthermore, per the aforementioned 2018 video by Patrick, as though to rub salt in the wound, a nearby Holiday Inn had undercut the rates of the hotel that the con was working with, and many of the people who were attending the con quickly caught on to that and stayed at the Holiday Inn instead, which only furthered the con's financial woes. And while, to some extent, they were able to lessen the financial blow that this dealt by making some adjustments to their budget, they didn't get similar leeway in the contract that they had with the hotel.
we were kind of stuck on the terms of our hotel contract. We had a fairly substantial number of hotel rooms to move in order to sort of cover our attrition clause in there, and that unfortunately wasn't something that we could like entirely get out of, and as it turns out was sort of the biggest portion of our budget deficit on the whole event. And again, it's, you know, these things happen as you look at a contract and you figure, oh, we'll be able to fill those hotel rooms no problem, when a lot of room nights are unfilled at this particular rate, and it adds up. So we did our best to at the very least shift some of that spending around and and kind of get a little more for it, rather than just effectively spending money on empty hotel rooms, you know. And again, that's goes back to working with the staff at the hotel and at the convention center. Everybody was honestly fantastic to work with.
In the years since, this event has become kinda legendary among those who were there, and certainly among those who planned it. In fact, in 2018, Patrick, Christian, and PAC Vice Chair Mara Carpathian and Facilities Liaison Elliot hosted a retrospective panel on it at Anime Boston since it was PAC's 10-year anniversary. So yeah, in case it wasn't already obvious, there's a lot of lessons that were taken from PAC for sure. Some of which were lessons taken from what they did wrong, of course, but also what they did right. Because despite its lack of financial success, the people who were there seemed to love it. Said Mike Toole, writing about the con in 2012, PAC was a great concept that failed only because of a little irrational exuberance and some unfortunate circumstances. Really, the only people I've heard who didn't enjoy the event were, understandably, the dealers. Per that video of Patrick's, there was even one dealer who was offered a free night in the hotel in exchange for not leaving early. But anyways, the idea of a more education-centered, adult-only con, you know, even now, I think it's still got potential. So yeah, this is all to say that, at least in my opinion, especially for 2008, the idea itself wasn't bad, and the execution wasn't completely bad either. It's just that in the areas they did trip up, even by their own admission, they tripped up pretty hard. In any case, to go ahead and get this little tangent wrapped up, while I definitely think I told y'all the main bullet points about PAC, if you want to learn about this in more detail, then Patrick has a half-hour-long video about the con on the Anime Cons TV channel, and Samantha wrote about the 2018 panel on Anime Herald. I'll have links to both of those in the description. And on that note, at long last, let's go ahead and get back to Anime Boston. So, yeah, this is all to say that 2008 was extremely not a great year for the New England Anime Society. So between how understandably upset LineCon left so many people and the financial repercussions from PAC, there was a lot of pressure to make 2009 a good year and to show everybody that Anime Boston was worth giving another chance. So how was the con that year? Well, like I mentioned earlier, registration went smoothly the weekend of the event. Calafina and Yuki Kajiura were there. They got to host the US premiere of the fifth Garden of Sinners movie, Paradox Paradigm. And ultimately, the con had a reported attendance of 15,438 total people. For perspective, 2008 had a reported attendance of 14,339 total people. This would also be the first year that Bad Anime Bad, as hosted by Brian T. Price, was at Anime Boston, which he's called his favorite con to host this event at. But what is it, you may be wondering? Well, technically it's a panel, but it's more like a comedy event, or really even a viewing party of sorts. It's an annual gathering, in a massive room no less, where Brian watches just aggressively bad anime or anime-adjacent material with the audience and makes commentary. Think stuff like Garzy's Wing.
Ow! My body is aching. What happened? I was bruised all over my body because I had to fight naked. Mom told me I have bruises all over my body. Is there any connection to this? There is a war going on. Even dinosaurs are here. And they use bows and arrows. My sword is unbelievably dull. If you die over there, what will happen to me back here? I don't know whether our body and mind are split. I don't know how we got separated, but I think we are still one person. We die together? Probably.
Or Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned.
If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. Count Dracula, sovereign of all vampires, exhibiting an apparent hunger for ordinary mortal food.
This event has since become something of a staple event at Anime Boston. It's definitely a big fan favorite for absolute sure. To quote Samantha's coverage of the panel for Anime Herald in 2015, with each passing year, the crowds have grown to an impressive scale. What began as a humble panel has now become a 2-hour mega event which packs over 2,000 fans into the cavernous Hall D in the Hynes. That's a lot of poor misguided lambs being led to the slaughter by their so-called friends. Those who return year after year prove to be truly fascinating, though. Whether it's Stockholm Syndrome, masochism, or some perverse combination of the two, these folks line up eagerly for the opportunity to see titles that should have been killed with fire ages ago. But while Brian's been hosting Bad Anime Bad at Anime Boston since 2009, both this panel's history and Brian's involvement with it stretches back much further than that.
As far as how long I've been doing it, okay, so it actually kind of came in stages. So 2001 was the first year I was ever officially on as a panelist. That was at Otakon 2001, which there's a whole story about Otakon there, where we often say that was the year Baltimore was exploding, literally. So there's a whole set of con stories there.
Hi. Just interrupting real quick, since I'm assuming that many of you probably had the same confused reaction I did to hearing this. So just real quick, yeah, this was a thing that happened. It was tripropylene, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. And the month prior, it was involved in the Howard Street tunnel fire as well. But per a press release from Maryland.gov, here is what happened during Otakon 2001 weekend, not too terribly far from the venue. A manhole cover near the intersection of Pratt and Light Streets popped into the air as a result of a fire and explosion in the storm system beneath the street. MDE's Emergency Response Division, Baltimore City Fire and Department of Public Works, as well as the U.S. Coast Guard crews, responded to the explosive situation and took immediate action to protect public health and safety. Over the next 5 days, nearly 3,000 gallons of tripropylene was pumped from the city's underground storm drains and conduits in that area. And per an archive of Otakon's website, in spite of the train wreck, fire, street repairs, minor explosions, and bursting water mains, it was fun! Our otaku were even dancing in the water from the fire hydrant at 2 a.m. on Saturday night, Sunday morning. They were flushing the street, no fire there. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what people are referring to when they talk about Otakon 2001 being the year that Baltimore exploded. So with that knowledge now in your pocket, let's go ahead and get back to Brian.
But the panel was originally started by Neil Nadelman, professional translator, who I believe was also a guest at Boston this year. He started it as Bad Anime Bad, Bad Anime Bad. And myself, my friend Robert Fenelon, the guy who got me into speaking on panels, and another friend of mine, Diane Soder, Sodher, we all got grabbed to participate, kind of like on the fly. And so we're like, sure. And then the next year, Neil let me help out a little bit during the panel as well. And then from there on, after a couple of years, when I started getting more comfortable with speaking on panels, around, I think it was 2004 or 5, I was talking with Robert. By the way, the spelling of his last name is Fenelon, Fenelon. I said, I'm thinking about doing Bad Anime Bad on my own. What do you think? He said, I think you're ready. And that's when I started running it as my own thing. And then over time it evolved. I'd get an idea here, I'd get an idea there, and I would try to include it into the panel, into the presentation. Like the moment of Zen, obviously a nod to the Daly show. One year I decided, let's highlight this one odd thing that really stands out about the showcase piece. And I just decided to keep on running with it.
So, yeah, 2009 was a good and eventful year for Anime Boston, allowing them to continue growing despite all the chaos in 2008. And sure enough, the following year, 2010, the con finally got a triangular banner in front of the Hynes Convention Center, which according to Patrick, only happens when you rent out the entire space, and as such, was something he recalls feeling particularly proud of.
One of the times we went to the Hynes for a tour, just to get a feel for the space and figure out where we're going to put everything, we looked up at the front, and whatever convention was there at the time had a banner in the little triangle area above the main door. And we asked the Hynes representative, how do we get that? He said, you got to rent out the whole building. And that became a goal. And I forget what year it was, 2008 or 9, we finally rented out the whole building. And I think it was Adam, he showed me a picture of that sign and said, we finally did it. Yes, it's what we wanted to do, is have the banner there. So, but yeah, the Hynes has been great, and it worked out as a perfect venue because there's so many places to eat around there. The hotels are attached. Don't have to go outside, so if it rains or snows, it doesn't matter. And yeah.
So 20 years after getting the Gundam Wing Boys and the fire marshal showing up and people being unable to get into the con, what is going on with Anime Boston now? Well, as of when I'm working on this video, the 2023 event wrapped up not too terribly long ago, and the con seems to be getting back into the swing of things in the aftermath of its COVID cancellations. That being said, there is some looming nervousness about whether or not the city of Boston is going to convert the Hynes Convention Center into something else, thereby more or less forcing Anime Boston to move to the BCEC, the same venue that PAX East is held at. And, there's a lot of mixed opinions floating around out there about the idea of Anime Boston moving to the BCEC. On one hand, it's a nice venue, and it's definitely much bigger than the Hynes, but then on the other, there's concerns over whether or not the very spacious BCEC, which is definitely more equipped for stuff that happens at least mostly on one big show floor, like trade shows, would suit a con with a lot of stuff going on at any given time, such as Anime Boston. But at least for the time being, nothing is set in stone, and as such, Anime Boston still plans on being at the Hynes in 2024.
Realistically, at this point, we don't know anything that our attendees don't know in terms of what the Hynes is up to. They don't give us any extra information, so we're sitting on the same information that everyone else has. At this time, we still continue to have a contract for a few more years through the Hynes, and that's kind of where we're at on that one. As terms of moving to the BCEC, I think it's interesting to see how people phrase it, because some people phrase it as a very negative thing, but some people also phrase it as a very positive thing. Looking at the BCEC, it's a nice convention center.
You think it would? You think that Anime Boston, if it had to move to the BCEC, it could?
I think there are, with the BCEC, a lot of logistical challenges. It's set up very, very differently than the Hynes is. But I think that I have watched our staff team overcome a lot of interesting logistical challenges that, if put to it, I definitely think they could make it work for what we would need to do.
Today, Anime Boston is incomparably larger than it was in 2003. But that point that Greg Ayres made about it still having something of a small con feel is something that I've heard a couple of times now in regards to what makes this con so special to its regular attendees, its volunteers, and so on.
Boston is that little heartstrings as well as just something different. I've never seen a big show that can maintain the small atmosphere that Boston has. And I've said that since I've been coming here, and it really hasn't changed.
Speaking of which, another common answer I heard as to what makes the con so special had to do with the staff and volunteers, and how they go above and beyond every year to make the con such a wonderful place. Furthermore, just about all of the current Anime Boston volunteers that I interviewed gave me impassioned speeches about how much they love volunteering for the con, and how they'd encourage others to volunteer as well. I've heard a number of anecdotes about volunteering, everything from the friends, partners, and communities that people have found because of it, to stories about how hard everyone works to make the con such a magical place. And for what it's worth, I'll absolutely co-sign that statement. Volunteers are the lifeblood of cons, and it can be a really great way to do anything from making new friends to just budget-friendly con going. It can be really, really cool. Moving on, another thing that makes Anime Boston so special is just how connected they are with their history. To be more specific, they've made very tangible efforts to preserve their history. For example, on the website, you can access some, not all, but some of the program guides from earlier years, and they still have public photo galleries for every single year as well. And while it's not there every year, some years Anime Boston has had a little museum in the con where people can see stuff like programs, shirts, badges, and other relics, I guess you could say, from previous years, like this bat autographed by a number of 2003 guests, including, but not limited to, all the Gundam Wing Boys. Per the little placard, it was meant to be part of a Princess 9 cosplay group, but disappeared during the convention, and later reappeared in the guest's autograph suite. And, I'm just gonna go ahead and put this on out there. I think this is really cool and that more cons should be doing stuff like this. Some cons do. For example, I know Otakon had a museum at least once, and I get that it's certainly not feasible for every single con, but ones that can preserve their history absolutely should. It's something really cool for attendees to see and do. It can make for a good point of reference for anyone trying to learn more about the con, anyone who's feeling nostalgic, and also, I get that it's kind of weird to think about it this way, but this stuff is historical, and I definitely think they're worth preserving in some form for later years, whether it's a physical museum or a digital archive.
I think that the history of Anime Boston is important to us because, it is what makes us. We do keep the museum running. I think 2013 was one year, and then we did it last year because it was technically our 20th anniversary. So it seems like it's just going to be more for anniversaries at this time because it does take a bit of manpower, but there is people that are always trying to collect the parts of the museum to get the museum to be together. Because, it's difficult to get people to part with those 2006 program guides.
So on that note, I think that I've said everything I wanted to say. I love Anime Boston. It was very fun getting to explore its history in this way. I hope that more cons start making more efforts to preserve their history, and, in closing, if anyone who has the power to choose Anime Boston 2024's musical guest just so happens to be watching this video, I'm just gonna go ahead and throw it on out there that Versailles is really cool. If I could change one thing about Anime Boston, it would not be about Anime Boston. It would be about the venue, and I would remove Italy and a food court back.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. If I won the lottery and remembered to do that, I would spend millions of dollars to reverse that.